Richard Blackwell was a billionaire known for testing everyone around him. But when he tried to test his new maid, Diana Washington, he triggered a chain of events he never saw coming. In a world built on lies, one woman's quiet strength would expose the truth and bring an entire empire crashing down. Richard Blackwell lay motionless on the leather couch in his office, eyes half closed, pretending to sleep while his mind stayed razor sharp. Scattered across the coffee table in front of him were neat stacks of cash, $15,000 placed with surgical intention. It wasn't a careless mess, it was bait. He'd done this many times before with new employees, especially maids. The last 3 had failed within minutes. All he needed was one touch, one bill missing, one sign of temptation, and he'd have another reason to fire someone. It was a game to him, a game he always won. And now it was Diana Washington's turn. Quiet, reserved, too polite for his taste. He didn't trust people like her, people who kept their thoughts hidden behind calm eyes. He listened carefully as her footsteps approached the office. They were soft, measured, and without hesitation. She knocked lightly before entering, even though she had been told the room was empty. Richard remained still, breathing slow, waiting for the sound of rustling money or the creak of a bill being slipped away. Instead, he heard nothing but the faint hum of the air conditioner and the cautious sound of Diana exhaling as she noticed him asleep. She stepped closer, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. Richard anticipated the familiar shift in the air, the one that always happened when someone leaned over the bills. But instead, he heard her pull the cleaning cart closer, open a drawer, and take out a small notepad slowly. Meticulously, she collected every scattered bill, aligning them edge to edge as if handling something sacred rather than stolen wealth. Richard cracked an eyelid just enough to see her work. No greed in her eyes, no curiosity, no hesitation. It's only precision and respect. She placed the organized stack neatly on the center of the table, then paused. She peeled off a tiny yellow post-it and wrote something quickly before placing it beside the money. Then, she left the room without a sound. Richard waited another 30 seconds before sitting up. The cash was untouched. But the note caught his eye. It read, "Asterisk integrity is who you are when no one is watching." Asterisk. His irritation flared instantly. It wasn't that she hadn't stolen, he'd expected that. It was the fact that she had passed the test too perfectly. No fear, no panic, no confusion, just discipline. That bothered him more than dishonesty would have. People who were that controlled had secrets, and Richard hated secrets he didn't own. The next day, the tests escalated. He left his laptop open on the dining table, displaying confidential emails involving private acquisitions. Any curious employee would have skimmed through. Diana simply closed the laptop, wiped the surface around it, and walked away. He placed his unlocked phone beside the sink while she cleaned the kitchen. She never touched it, only moved it gently to wipe beneath it, then returned it exactly as it was. He dropped his wallet, a leather one filled with credit cards and cash, beside the laundry basket. She placed it on the counter and continued, working without even glancing inside. Every trap failed because she didn't fall for any of them. Richard watched her through cameras, through reflections in glass, through slightly open doors. Observed the calmness in her movements, the humility in her posture, and the fact that she never complained, never rushed, never snooped. To him, that wasn't loyalty. It was calculated restraint. And calculated people were dangerous. He began to search for reasons to dislike her, to fire her, to expose whatever she was hiding. But in every corner of the mansion, she behaved like someone with nothing to gain and nothing to hide. That bothered him far more than if she'd stolen every dollar in his tests. But Diana Washington had her own reasons for keeping her hands clean. She had taken this job with intention long before Richard knew her name. She was not a maid by circumstance. She was a woman on a mission. Years ago, her younger brother Marcus had been arrested in a scandal orchestrated by Blackwell Corp. The evidence had been fabricated, the trial manipulated, and Marcus's life destroyed overnight. Diana had uncovered documents proving Richard's involvement, emails, transaction logs, offshore transfers. But the evidence wasn't enough to bring down a man protected by power, money, and influence. To expose him, she needed access. To get access, she needed proximity. And to stay close, she needed to be invisible, underestimated, forgettable. Richard believed he was the hunter, testing the integrity of a maid. But Diana had walked into his mansion with a quiet fire burning inside her. Every test he set was trivial compared to the real test she was preparing for. Wasn't here to clean his home. She was here to dismantle his empire one silent, carefully calculated step at a time. Diana moved through the mansion with a quiet precision that made her almost invisible, but every second she spent there was calculated. She had learned Richard Blackwell's habits with unnerving accuracy when he drank, when he bragged, when he let his guard drop, and when he became sloppy with his arrogance. She knew the exact minute he left his office every night, the angle at which he positioned the books on his shelves, the drawer he forgot to lock when distracted by power calls. While she dusted the cabinets, her phone camera captured quick photos of confidential documents. While wiping the glass desk, her smartwatch recorded conversations he had with partners who believed they were untouchable.
Oh.
She never stayed more than 10 seconds in a risky spot. She never made a sound that didn't belong. And every night, she sent the collected evidence to James Carter, once an FBI agent, now a quiet ally who had dedicated himself to exposing the corruption he could never touch while inside the system. James guided her step by step, warning her where lines were too dangerous, teaching her how to avoid digital traces, and reminding her that justice required patience. "You're inside a lion's den," he told her once. "Move like a shadow. Never a step too fast." Meanwhile, Richard's attention sharpened unnervingly. The more he watched Diana, the less he understood her. Everything about her felt deliberate, yet nothing about her seemed threatening. He began inventing reasons. To talk to her, to pull her into rooms unexpectedly, to observe her reactions. He'd ask her strange moral questions. "What would you do if you found a bag of money on the street?" And she'd answer with peaceful certainty, quoting her grandmother, "A person who takes what isn't theirs carries its weight forever." When he tried provoking her with snide comments about people in service positions, she responded with such calm humility that it made him feel foolish. Her steadiness unnerved him, feeding his suspicion that she was either extraordinarily disciplined or hiding something big. What should have been a simple employer-maid dynamic twisted into a subtle psychological battle. Richard, who was used to controlling every room, started pacing more, watching security feeds late into the night, wondering why he couldn't get a reaction out of her. The more he tried to expose her flaws, the more flawless she appeared. And nothing drove a man like Richard Blackwell crazier than perfection he didn't own. But Diana's calm was built on a painful foundation, one that reached back years before she stepped inside Richard's mansion. Marcus, her younger brother, had been brilliant with numbers, loyal to a fault, and proud of the work he did at Blackwell Corp. He had discovered accounting discrepancies hidden beneath layers of falsified reports. At first he thought it was a mistake. Then he realized it was fraud, and on a scale that implicated powerful men. He tried to report it through the proper channels, only to be met with false accusations, staged evidence, and a termination that destroyed his reputation overnight. Richard's lawyers had been merciless, painting Marcus as unstable and dishonest. He was blacklisted from every firm, mocked by former colleagues, and dragged through financial ruin. Depression swallowed him whole, and substance abuse followed, as he struggled to survive the shame that wasn't his to carry. When Diana found him one cold morning lifeless, surrounded by the documents he had collected as his last hope, her life shattered. But in his notes, she found direction. Dates, files, passwords, hidden USB drives. He had died trying to do the right thing, and she vowed she would finish what Marcus began, even if it meant burning her own life to the ground. That promise guided her through the night of Richard's lavish investor dinner. A last-minute event he demanded she organize simply to test her limits. He expected panic. Instead, she coordinated everything with seamless precision. The decor, the catering, the seating chart tailored to personalities she had studied quietly for weeks. The guests arrived, senators, CEOs, bankers, all dressed in confidence and corruption. Diana poured wine with a gentle smile while her discreet recording device captured every whispered confession. Deals involving offshore accounts, political favors, and orchestrated bankruptcies flowed as freely as the champagne. One guest even joked about burying evidence deeper than Marcus Washington. She kept her face calm, but her heart beat like thunder. She moved through the room, collecting truths sharper than knives. Richard watched her the entire evening, increasingly fascinated. When the dinner ended flawlessly, he approached her with an offer: personal assistant, a higher salary, access to his private schedules. A promotion meant trust, and trust meant danger. Diana lowered her eyes respectfully and declined, saying only, "Some positions come with a cost I cannot pay." Her refusal struck Richard harder than any insult. In his world, everyone wanted more. Everyone had a price. Everyone except the woman he still believed was simply a maid, yet somehow felt like a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he couldn't control, and the game between them sharpened, quietly shifting into something far more dangerous than either realized. Richard Blackwell's annual charity ball was the crown jewel of his public image. A night of glittering chandeliers, orchestras, and reporters eager to praise his generosity. When he asked Diana to organize the entire event, he believed he was testing her loyalty one final time. But for Diana, this wasn't a test, it was the moment she had been preparing for since the night she found Marcus's documents spread across his cold apartment floor. The invitation list, the layout of the ballroom, the sound system, the lighting grid. She studied everything with the eyes of someone planning not an event, but a battlefield. She spent late nights walking through the halls of the grand venue, tracing the wiring of the speakers, learning which microphones fed into the main audio channels, identifying blind spots where security wouldn't look. She had rehearsed the sequence with James Carter dozens of times, adjusting every detail until there was no room for error. And on the night of the ball, she dressed not in a maid's uniform, but in her grandmother's old graduation dress, soft blue fabric. She chose it not for beauty, but for strength. Every stitch reminded her of the women in her family who had fought battles quietly and won with integrity rather than power. Tonight, she would carry all of them with her. As the guests poured into the ballroom, Richard stood at the center like a king surveying his kingdom. Flashing cameras followed him, eager to catch his rehearsed smiles and hollow speeches. The orchestra played softly under the golden light of the chandeliers, and the crowd murmured with admiration. Diana moved through the room calmly, appearing to handle logistics. But her eyes locked onto one critical element: the control booth, where the main audio system sat waiting. James had helped her preload an encrypted file hours of recordings exposing the darkest corners of Richard's empire. All she had to do was trigger it. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Richard stepped onto the stage, basking in applause as if bathed in sunlight. He began his speech with practiced charm, talking about generosity, compassion, and community support. His words echoed across the ballroom, coated in false sincerity. And then, as he prepared to announce another multi-million-dollar initiative, Diana pressed the button. The shift in the room was immediate and violent. Instead of Richard's voice, the speakers erupted with a familiar recording, his own voice, but laced with greed, cruelty, and corruption. His private conversations played across the ballroom with chilling clarity. "I don't care what the journalists think, buy them off or shut them up," he snarled in one clip. Another recording captured senators discussing bribes disguised as donations. Then came a leaked phone call in which Richard mocked minority communities while planning a money laundering scheme with a foreign investor. Gasps spread like wildfire across the room. Phones shot into the air. Reporters scrambled to record the chaos. The hotel's live broadcast system connected directly to local news channels, and within seconds the entire city was watching. Richard froze at the center of the stage, face draining of color. He lunged toward the sound booth. But hotel security, briefed earlier by Diana under the guise of technical precautions, blocked him. While the room churned with disbelief, Diana stepped onto the stage. She held the microphone with steady, unwavering hands. Her voice was soft at first, but the silence in the ballroom amplified every word. She introduced herself not as a maid, but as the sister of Marcus Washington, name that landed like a strike of lightning. She told the story of a young accountant who discovered truth and was punished for it. She described the lies, the falsified charges, the orchestrated downfall. And then she lifted her chin and told the room that every piece of evidence, every email, every recording, every financial document had already been sent to the FBI, the IRS, and federal prosecutors. "My brother tried to expose the truth," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, but never breaking. "Tonight I finish what he started," Richard shouted from across the stage, his voice cracking as he ordered security to remove her, to shut down the system, to stop the broadcast. But no one moved. The room was no longer his. It belonged to the truth echoing from every speaker. Guests backed away from him as if he were poisonous. Some recorded him with shaking hands, capturing the panic in his eyes. Then came the heavy footsteps. Federal agents storming through the gilded doors in dark uniforms marked with bold white letters. The music was cut, replaced by the sound of commands and the metallic click of handcuffs. Richard tried to run, but agents tackled him within seconds. On live television, he was dragged away in front of investors, senators, and the very reporters who once worshipped him. Senator Morrison and several other officials were escorted out as well. Faces pale, hands bound, careers ending in an instant. The room buzzed with stunned whispers, but outside, the world was already reacting. Social media exploded within minutes. #JusticeForMarcus surged through every platform. #TruthUnlocked fanned across screens like wildfire, and in the center of the storm, Diana stood beneath the chandeliers, the weight of years lifting slowly from her shoulders. She had walked into the lion's den with nothing but courage, evidence, and the memory of her brother guiding her. Now, at last, the empire built on lies was crumbling live, in front of the world. 6 months after the charity ball, the world felt different for Diana Washington. The quiet strength she had carried for years now stood in the open, recognized and respected. She no longer wore uniforms or moved silently through hallways. Instead, she walked confidently into the glass-walled offices of her own firm, Washington Consulting, a company dedicated to ethical auditing and corporate transparency. The sign on the door carried her family name, and every time she saw it, she felt a mix of pride and responsibility. What began with Marcus's desperate notes and her own grief had grown into a mission that now helped others fight the battles they once thought impossible. She hired analysts, legal advisors, and young professionals who had faced discrimination in their careers. People came to her not because she had money or status, but because she had proven that truth, when pursued with courage, could take down giants. Corporations sought her services to repair their images. Governments requested her audits, and universities invited her to speak about integrity. Even more meaningful, her daughter now attended a top private school on a full academic scholarship, not because of wealth, but because the world had chosen to invest in the child of a woman who had changed it. In honor of Marcus, Diana founded the Marcus Washington Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting whistleblowers, protecting employees who uncovered fraud, and providing mental health resources to those crushed under corporate retaliation. She wanted no one to suffer the way her brother had. The foundation offered legal aid, safety networks, and trauma counseling, everything Marcus should have had, but never received. Every success story, every protected whistleblower, felt like another piece of justice she could give back in her brother's name. Meanwhile, the empire Richard Blackwell spent a lifetime building collapsed faster than even his enemies expected. After the recordings, financial documents, and testimonies flooded federal agencies, the investigation moved swiftly. In court, Richard tried to reclaim the persona he had cultivated for years, the charming philanthropist, the misunderstood businessman, but his own voice from the leaked recordings echoed louder than any excuse he could invent. Witnesses, once silenced by fear, stepped forward one by one. His closest allies turned on him to save themselves. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, citing a systematic abuse of wealth and influence that harmed countless lives. His assets were seized, his company dismantled, and his name became synonymous with corruption. The world that once bowed to him now wanted nothing to do with him. His mansion was auctioned off, his investors fled, and even his political connections severed all ties. Inside prison walls, Richard faced something he had never known: irrelevance. No amount of power or charm could free him now. Diana, however, didn't dwell on Richard's downfall. She had no desire to gloat or revel in his misery. Her mission had shifted to something larger, using her experience and the evidence Marcus had uncovered to help others who had been silenced. With James Carter at her side, she began reviewing cases across the country: employees blacklisted for speaking up, women harassed by powerful executives, young interns scapegoated for financial crimes committed by their bosses. James handled the strategic investigations, using his FBI expertise to navigate legal systems Diana never fully trusted. She handled the human side, listening to victims' stories, offering them strength when they felt small, and showing them that integrity could survive even the darkest storms. Together, they became a force that companies feared and vulnerable people relied on. Diana didn't just chase justice. She inspired it. Still, even as her days filled with new victories, she knew there was one place she had been avoiding, one final moment she needed to face alone. On a quiet Sunday morning, she drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of white lilies, Marcus's favorite. She walked slowly among the headstones until she reached his grave. The name etched into the stone as familiar as her own heartbeat. She knelt down, brushing away leaves and dust, and placed the flowers gently in front of the marker. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The wind moved softly, carrying the distant sounds of the city now living with the truth he died trying to reveal. When she finally found her voice, it trembled with love more than sorrow. She told him everything: how the evidence he left behind had brought down the empire that destroyed him, how the entire world had watched the truth unfold, how people now spoke his name with respect instead of suspicion. She told him about the foundation, her firm, and the people she was helping because of him. "Your voice didn't disappear, Marcus," she whispered, touching the stone. "It only needed time. And now the world finally heard you." As she stood up, a sense of closure settled over her, not the end of grief, but the beginning of peace. She walked away from the grave, with her chin lifted, her heart steady, and her mission clear. The story that began with injustice had transformed into one of hope, rebuilding, and the extraordinary power of bravery. And Diana Washington, once underestimated, now stood as a reminder that even the quietest voices can change the world when spoken with courage.